Hey, what's up? In this video, I'm going to discuss Andrew Yang's proposal for the freedom dividend in the following context. I want to share a few points of discussion provided by Jordan Peterson and Steven Pinker from a conversation published back in August. The link to that discussion will be posted in the description below. Now, their discussion had nothing to do with Andrew Yang or the freedom dividend per se, but I want to tie a few points that were made into the UBI discussion.
There is some elasticity into what we cognitively categorize as our group. And one of the great achievements of any kind of nation building is to instill a feeling, well, we're all Canadians or we're all Swiss. Unless you have that fictional family, that fictional clan of the nation, then people tend not to cooperate, including in ways of providing social welfare for the worst off.
If it is the case that people are more likely to be generous to those that they see in some sense as their in-group, then what it suggests is that you need to take the mosaic of your culture, the African Canadians and the European Canadians and the Asian Canadians, the same in the US, and have them maintain their culture and their traditions, but also to embed them inside a broader game that constitutes the national identity, that unites them all despite their differences. And it seems like, given what you just described, that unless you can forge that trans-ethnic or trans-racial identity, that you motivate people to be less generous in their social policies.
Why would the top 1% of the country, or even just people that's doing well in life, need an extra $1,000 a month?
Well,
should it really be for universal? Should it really be for everybody?
There are a few reasons why I think it should be universal. Well, one in this example is like Jeff Bezos and the guy are going to be paying hundreds of millions, billions of dollars into it, so we don't care if they get $1,000 a month. It's like, it's just like a reminder that they're still a human being and a citizen. But if you try and make it income based, it ends up being a rich to poor transfer, and then it ends up being politicized in a particular way. Or if you make it universal, it's like, look, it's just you're an American, you're a citizen, you get $1,000 a month. And then you end up getting rid of all the administration, you get rid of all the reporting, you get rid of all the, oh, my circumstances changed, or I'm going to underreport because I want to be below this line so I can get the money. So you get rid of all of that stuff, and then you get rid of the stigma. Because one of the problems with our existing programs is that, like there's a stigma attached to being in them, and then everyone politically attacks them. And this you can't attack. And Alaska's the proof, because in a deep red state, Alaskans love their dividends so much that they said they would accept higher taxes to keep the dividend. That's how much they love it.
It turns out that if you get people's income up to about $5,000 a year in terms of gross domestic product, they actually start to care about the environment, which I suppose is because they're not worried about dying instantly that day or that week. And so we seem to be in this perverse situation for a pessimist where we could make people wealthy and in a positive manner, and we could make the world a better place simultaneously.
As you mentioned, it's a little bit like like environmental progress, in that far from being in opposition to economic growth, it's often economic growth that lets people become more munificent, more generous. There are a number of reasons why every wealthy country has a social safety net, and why, as countries get richer, like Brazil and India and China, they turn their attention to more social welfare. The European and North American societies did it in the 20th century, and the developing world is following suit. Partly it's because some of the redistribution is investment. It's a public good. It's really good if the entire population is educated, for everyone, including the people who are hiring them. And so some of it is just investment in public goods.
You lived in Montreal. I lived in Montreal. Montreal's a relatively flat city in some sense in terms of its economic distribution. Like, there are no pockets of terrifying poverty, at least on the island. And it's a very safe place. And And so it's socially rich in some sense. Like I always felt wealthy when I lived in Montreal, even though I was living on a PhD's stipend, which was very
Probably
low.
the area we used to call the student ghetto, which
Right.
now has luxury condominiums.
Right. Well, but what was so lovely about Montreal was that it was safe, it was beautiful, and it had an unbelievably vibrant public culture.
Yes,
And that was all a consequence of the fact that people, generally speaking, were well enough off. And so, you know, if you contrast that with a country like Brazil, where a tiny minority of people have all the wealth, well, they're stuck with the problem of living in gilded prisons. They have to move their children around in helicopters. And like, I think one of the things that people realize as societies become richer is that it's better to calculate your wealth on a broader level, to include more people within the purview of what constitutes wealth for you. Because it's so nice to be in a city that's thriving and healthy and not crime-ridden and resentful. And those need to be factored in as elements of individual wealth.